Part 1. A Call to Serve. Cardinal Robert Prevost's Early Life and Formation. Robert Francis Prevost was born on September 14, 1955, in Chicago, Illinois, into a family where faith wasn't just a part of life, it was the very foundation. The youngest of 3 children, Robert grew up surrounded by the teachings of the Catholic Church. His parents, devout Catholics, made sure that the words of the gospel weren't just something they heard on Sundays, but something that shaped every decision they made. The community around him, a bustling neighborhood in the heart of Chicago, helped solidify his belief that life was about serving others, particularly those who had little voice of their own. Little did Robert know, this foundational belief would lead him on a path that would eventually change the course of history. From an early age, Robert was drawn to the idea of service. Whether it was helping at the local soup kitchen or organizing community events for his parish, he was always looking for ways to make a difference. By the time he entered high school, it was clear to everyone around him that he was destined for something greater than just living a comfortable, ordinary life. The young Robert wasn't just interested in learning. He was interested in understanding, truly understanding, the complexities of faith, life, and service. After high school, Robert attended Villanova University in Pennsylvania, where he enrolled in a pre-theology program. It was at Villanova that he started to seriously consider the priesthood. The university was not just an academic institution. It was a place where Robert began to engage deeply with the ideas of faith, justice, and how a person could serve God through service to humanity. Villanova's strong Augustinian roots made it the perfect place for him to start his journey. During these years of study, Robert began to understand that his faith was about more than personal salvation. It was about bringing others into the light of Christ. He wanted to help not just by giving a handout, but by transforming lives. It wasn't enough to just pray for the poor. Robert wanted to be among them, to live as they lived, and to help them find the hope he had found in his own life. In the summer of his junior year at Villanova, Robert made a trip to the Dominican Republic for a summer missionary program. That trip was transformative. He had been to other countries before, but nothing compared to what he experienced in the Dominican Republic. He was surrounded by people whose daily lives were marked by poverty, illness, and lack of opportunity. But more than that, Robert found in these people a deep, unwavering faith that didn't seem to depend on wealth, social status, or comfort. It was in the Dominican Republic that he felt his calling deepen. He realized that the priesthood, for him, wasn't about elevating himself. It was about walking alongside others, offering them the tools of faith to endure the hardships of life. After returning to Villanova, Robert made a life-changing decision. He would join the Augustinian Order, a religious community known for its commitment to service, education, and the promotion of social justice. The Augustinians believed that the best way to serve God was by living a life in service to others, and Robert felt drawn to this lifestyle. His decision was met with overwhelming support from his family. While they were sad to see him leave for the seminary, they knew that Robert's choice was a reflection of his deep commitment to his faith and his desire to serve others. His mother often said that Robert's calling was like a flame that couldn't be extinguished. It was something he had been born with. They understood that for Robert, there was no turning back now. Robert entered the Augustinian Seminary in 1976, and it was here that his understanding of service and faith would mature. The seminary was rigorous, both academically and spiritually, but Robert thrived. His deep love for theology and social justice made him a standout student. The more he learned, the more his desire to serve the poor and the marginalized intensified. In the seminary, he encountered many other young men who shared his sense of calling, and together they committed themselves to lives of prayer, study, and service. In his second year, Robert made his first pilgrimage to South America. He visited Peru, where he spent time working with local communities in the Andean mountains. There, he witnessed poverty on a scale that was unimaginable to many in the United States. Yet, he also saw something else, a hope and a faith that were unshakable. People who had so little in material wealth had an abundance of spiritual wealth. They relied on their faith to survive the daily challenges of life. Robert's time in Peru marked a pivotal moment in his life. He felt a deep connection to the people there, and it was clear to him that his calling was not just to serve in a parish in the United States, but to work in places where the Church's presence could make the most impact, places where poverty, oppression, and injustice were rampant. It was here, in the remote corners of Peru, that Robert decided he would dedicate his life to working with the poor and the disenfranchised. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready for the challenge. By 1981, Robert had completed his seminary training and was ordained as a priest in the Augustinian Order. His first assignment was to work with the impoverished communities in the mountains of Peru. Here, he truly understood what it meant to live out the Augustinian values of service, community, and social justice. He did not just visit the poor or serve them from a distance. He lived with them, ate with them, and shared in their struggles. It wasn't long before his reputation as a man of deep faith and action began to spread. Robert's commitment to the poor, his tireless work in advocating for the marginalized, and his unwavering dedication to justice earned him the respect of not only his fellow priests, but also the local community. He didn't just preach about social justice, he lived it out every single day. Robert's time in Peru was transformative for both him and the communities he served. It was in Peru that he gained a deep understanding of what it truly meant to serve others, to give of yourself fully, to live in solidarity with those who have nothing, and to never stop fighting for their dignity. His years in Peru shaped him in ways that would influence his future decisions and leadership within the Church. Part 2. A Mission of Service. Cardinal Robert Prevost's ministry and work in Peru. After Robert Prevost was ordained as a priest in 1981, he was sent on his first mission assignment to the remote and impoverished regions of Peru. Little did he know, this would become the defining period of his life. Peru, with its majestic Andean mountains and vibrant, resilient communities, would shape his future and help him understand the deeper meaning of his calling. This was not just about spiritual service. This was about social transformation. It was about serving the poor in ways that went beyond charity. Robert's mission was one of empowerment, justice, and human dignity. Robert arrived in Peru with a sense of duty and excitement, eager to immerse himself in a culture and a community where the faith was alive and palpable. What he found there was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The people he met lived in conditions that many in the developed world would find unimaginable. Families crowded into small, crumbling homes without access to basic needs like clean water, adequate health care, and education. Yet, in the face of poverty and hardship, the people of Peru displayed a kind of faith and hope that Robert had never seen before. It wasn't just about the rituals and the prayers. It was about a way of life that demanded resilience, a deep trust in God, and a communal spirit that brought people together despite their struggles. Robert's initial work in Peru was centered around teaching and providing spiritual support to the communities in the Andean highlands. He served in several villages, helping to establish small parishes and youth programs that encouraged local participation. His work wasn't just about leading masses. It was about understanding the specific needs of each community and working hand in hand with the people to address them. He saw firsthand how faith could be a source of strength and solidarity, but he also saw that faith alone was not enough to overcome the structural inequalities that plagued society. One of the most important lessons Robert learned during his time in Peru was that helping people was not just about providing immediate relief. It was about addressing the root causes of their struggles. This realization led him to shift his focus. While he continued to lead religious services and offer spiritual guidance, he also became deeply involved in advocating for social justice and addressing the issues that kept people trapped in cycles of poverty. Robert began to work alongside local leaders to implement projects that focused on education, health care, and sustainable development. His efforts were not always met with immediate success, but the communities he served began to see the tangible impact of his work. Robert was no longer just a priest in their eyes. He was a partner in the fight for justice. His work in Peru was not without its challenges. The country, during the 1980s and early 1990s, was dealing with the devastation of internal conflict, political corruption, and economic instability. Robert found himself in the midst of these struggles, trying to provide a sense of hope and stability to people who had been left behind by the system. Yet, despite the immense difficulties, Robert never wavered in his commitment to justice and human dignity. He believed that the Gospel's call for justice extended beyond the church walls and into the streets, where people were suffering. One of the most poignant moments of his time in Peru came when Robert visited a small, remote village that had been ravaged by poverty and the ongoing conflict. The villagers, many of whom had lost family members to violence, were skeptical of outsiders. But Robert, with his quiet yet unwavering presence, gained their trust. He sat with them, listened to their stories, and began to understand the depth of their pain. Slowly, he became a pillar of support for the community, not just in terms of providing spiritual care, but in advocating for their rights, their land, and their future. Robert's work in Peru was characterized by a deep, personal connection with the people he served. He didn't just work from the pulpit. He lived among the people, shared in their struggles, and fought for their rights. His approach to ministry was rooted in the belief that true service required walking alongside the people, not just offering them prayers from a distance. He learned the language of the people, embraced their customs, and worked tirelessly to create a bridge between the church and the communities that had long been marginalized by society. During his time in Peru, Robert also began to understand the broader social issues that affected the country. He became involved in efforts to address the education gap, working with local schools to ensure that children had access to quality education. He also became a strong advocate for healthcare, partnering with organizations to bring medical aid to rural communities that lacked basic healthcare services. His commitment to these causes was unwavering, and he quickly gained the respect of local leaders and international organizations alike. Robert's time in Peru was a profound experience that reshaped his understanding of faith, service, and justice. It taught him that the Gospel's message was not just about salvation in the afterlife, it was about transforming lives in the here and now. He learned that the Church's role in society was not just to offer spiritual solace, but to be a voice for the voiceless and a champion for the oppressed. His experiences in Peru became the foundation for his later work, both in the Vatican and as a cardinal. But even after his return to Rome, the lessons he learned in Peru stayed with him, guiding his decisions and shaping his leadership style. Robert's time in Peru also had a profound impact on the people he worked with. Many of them still remember him not just as a priest, but as someone who truly cared about their well-being, someone who fought for their rights and their dignity. He didn't just preach social justice, he lived it. His commitment to the poor and the marginalized became a hallmark of his ministry, and it would continue to define his work for the rest of his life. Part 3. Rising Influence. Cardinal Robert Prevost's role in the Vatican. After spending over a decade in Peru, Robert Prevost's reputation as a man of deep faith and social action had spread far beyond the borders of the country. His work was transformative, not only within the local communities he served, but also in the wider Church. The Vatican, recognizing his leadership and dedication to justice, began to take notice of his work. Robert's time in Peru was marked by his hands-on approach to social issues and his unwavering commitment to the poor, but it was clear that his impact was growing, and the time had come for him to return to Rome. In the early 1990s, after much prayer and reflection, Robert received a summons from the Vatican. He was invited to serve in a new capacity, one that would take him from the remote villages of Peru to the heart of the Catholic Church. He was appointed to the Congregation for Bishops, an important Vatican department that oversees the appointment of bishops around the world. This was a pivotal moment in his life, a moment that marked the beginning of his leadership role within the global Church. Despite the grandeur and authority of the Vatican, Robert remained grounded in the principles he had learned in Peru. His time there had shaped his understanding of leadership, teaching him that true power lay not in titles or offices, but in the ability to listen, to empathize, and to stand in solidarity with those on the margins. As a member of the Congregation for Bishops, Robert was able to bring this perspective to his work, ensuring that the Church's leadership was not only competent but also compassionate and committed to social justice. One of the first major challenges Robert faced in his new role was the need to address the growing disparity between the Church's leadership and the communities they served. Many of the bishops being appointed came from wealthy, urban backgrounds, and their understanding of the challenges faced by rural communities, particularly in developing countries, was limited. Robert, having spent so many years working with the poor in Peru, saw this as a critical issue. He pushed for the appointment of bishops who not only had strong theological backgrounds, but who also had a deep understanding of social justice and the lived experiences of the people they were meant to serve. His efforts were not without resistance. There were those within the Vatican who believed that the Church should focus solely on spiritual matters and not become entangled in political or social issues. But Robert's unwavering commitment to justice and his personal experiences with poverty and oppression gave him the courage to press on. Over time, he was able to change the way the Vatican approached the appointment of bishops, ensuring that those chosen were not only theologically sound but also deeply committed to serving the most vulnerable. Robert's work at the Vatican didn't stop with the appointment of bishops. In 2001, he was appointed as the president of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America, a position that would allow him to influence the Church's mission in one of the most challenging and dynamic regions in the world. Latin America, home to the largest Catholic population, was facing a range of issues, from economic inequality to political unrest. Robert's role was to guide the Church's efforts in addressing these issues while ensuring that the faithful in Latin America received the spiritual and material support they needed. One of Robert's most significant achievements in this role was his work in advocating for social justice and human rights in Latin America. He was deeply involved in the Church's efforts to support the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. He worked closely with local leaders to promote peace and stability in regions plagued by violence and conflict. Through his leadership, the Pontifical Commission became a key player in supporting local communities and advocating for policies that would reduce inequality and promote human dignity. But Robert's influence was not confined to Latin America. As a leader in the Vatican, he became a key figure in the Church's global efforts to address issues such as climate change, poverty, and migration. He worked tirelessly to bring attention to these issues, urging the Church to be a voice for the voiceless and to take a stronger stand on the global stage. His advocacy for the poor and his commitment to justice earned him respect not only within the Church, but also among international organizations and governments. Despite his growing influence, Robert remained humble and focused on the work that lay ahead. His time in the Vatican allowed him to shape the direction of the Church in a way that was consistent with the values he had upheld during his time in Peru. He believed that the Church's role in the world was not to be one of power and prestige, but one of service and humility. In his leadership, he emphasized the importance of solidarity, compassion, and justice. As Robert's reputation as a leader within the Vatican grew, so did his influence within the wider global Church. His work in Latin America and his commitment to social justice earned him the admiration of many, and he became a respected voice on issues affecting the global Church. His humility, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to justice made him a beloved figure, both within the Vatican and in the communities he served. The next chapter in Robert Prevost's journey would take him even further from the streets of Peru and into the papacy itself. But his time in the Vatican had prepared him for this moment. His leadership in the Church, rooted in his experiences with the poor and marginalized, had set the stage for his eventual election as Pope Leo XIV. As he moved forward, his vision for the Church would continue to be shaped by the lessons he had learned throughout his life, lessons of faith, justice, and the unshakable belief that the Church must stand with the poor and the oppressed. Part 4. A leader for the global Church, Cardinal Robert Prevost's legacy as a cardinal. As Cardinal Robert Prevost's influence continued to grow, so did his commitment to being a bridge between the Church and the world. He was no longer just a figure within the Vatican. He had become a global leader whose voice was not only heard within the halls of the Vatican but also echoed across continents. His work in Latin America, his advocacy for social justice, and his deep, abiding concern for the marginalized were some of the defining characteristics of his leadership. One of Cardinal Prevost's key contributions as a cardinal was his role in strengthening the Church's commitment to the poor and the vulnerable. Throughout his career, he had consistently emphasized that the Church's mission was not to seek power or prestige, but to serve the least among us. This belief became a cornerstone of his work in the Vatican, and as he rose through the ranks, he made sure that this vision was felt not just in Vatican policy, but also in the actions and priorities of the global Church. In his years as a cardinal, Robert was particularly focused on advocating for social justice initiatives across the world. Whether it was championing the rights of migrants, addressing the growing issue of climate change, or speaking out against systemic inequality, Cardinal Prevost was a voice that pushed the Church to confront the pressing issues of our time. He didn't just talk about social justice, he lived it. His time in Latin America had shown him that addressing injustice wasn't just about speaking in abstract terms. It was about action, engagement, and standing alongside those who had no voice. As a member of the College of Cardinals, Robert worked on numerous initiatives aimed at strengthening the Church's global outreach. One of the initiatives he helped lead was the Church's focus on interfaith dialogue, understanding, and peace-building. He believed that the future of the Church depended not just on its internal renewal, but also on its ability to engage with the wider world. Whether it was working with leaders of other Christian denominations or reaching out to other faith traditions, Cardinal Prevost always emphasized the importance of building bridges, not walls. This commitment to dialogue was especially important as global tensions were rising and religious divisions were becoming more pronounced. Another area where Cardinal Prevost's leadership had a profound impact was on the Church's approach to education. Drawing from his experiences in Peru, where he saw firsthand the transformative power of education in breaking the cycle of poverty, he became a passionate advocate for better educational opportunities in the global Church. He worked closely with Catholic educational institutions to ensure that schools, particularly in developing countries, were equipped to provide quality education to those who needed it most. For Cardinal Prevost, education was a key component of empowering individuals and communities to rise above the challenges they faced. His work also extended into the Church's response to the refugee crisis. As millions of people around the world were displaced by war, famine, and persecution, Cardinal Prevost advocated for a compassionate response from the global Church. He was a strong voice calling for greater empathy and support for refugees, ensuring that the Church remained steadfast in its mission to welcome the stranger, as taught by Jesus Christ. His work in this area earned him widespread respect, not just within the Church, but also from secular humanitarian organizations and government bodies who recognized his leadership and compassion. Cardinal Prevost's approach to leadership was never one of authoritarianism. He led with humility, with the understanding that his position was not one of privilege, but one of service. His humility was a defining feature of his character, and it resonated with everyone he worked with, from Vatican officials to grassroots community leaders. In a time when many church leaders were criticized for being out of touch with the needs of the people, Cardinal Prevost was a leader who remained grounded, focused on the day-to-day realities of life in the communities he served. His leadership was also marked by his ability to bring people together. Cardinal Prevost was not a man who sought to divide or create factions. He was a unifier. Whether it was bringing together different Catholic groups, working with leaders of other faiths, or bridging gaps between conservative and progressive elements within the Church, Cardinal Prevost had a unique ability to foster collaboration and understanding. He believed that the Church could only move forward by standing united, and he made it his mission to ensure that the Church's witness to the world was one of love, unity, and shared purpose. One of Cardinal Prevost's most significant achievements was his role in advocating for the Church's response to climate change. Long before it became a central issue for the Church, Cardinal Prevost was speaking out about the urgent need for environmental action. He believed that protecting the earth was not just an ecological issue, it was a moral one. For Cardinal Prevost, the environment was a gift from God, and it was the responsibility of humanity to protect it for future generations. His advocacy for the environment was a natural extension of his lifelong commitment to justice and the poor, as it was the poorest communities that were most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. By the time Cardinal Prevost was appointed Pope Leo XIV in 2025, his leadership in the Vatican had already left an indelible mark on the Church. His work with the poor, his advocacy for the environment, his promotion of social justice, and his ability to bring people together made him one of the most respected figures in the global Church. But even as Pope, Cardinal Prevost never lost sight of his humble beginnings and the lessons he had learned in the streets of Peru. His papacy would be marked by the same commitment to justice, compassion, and unity that had guided him throughout his life. Part 5. The Conclave and the Election. Cardinal Robert Prevost becomes Pope Leo XIV. In May of 2025, the world watched with bated breath as the College of Cardinals gathered to elect a new pope. The conclave, a solemn and secretive process, had been initiated after the unexpected resignation of Pope Francis. While many speculated about the possible candidates, there was one name that stood out as a potential successor: Cardinal Robert Prevost. His reputation as a leader deeply committed to social justice, his tireless work in Latin America, and his commitment to the poor and marginalized had made him a widely respected figure both within the Vatican and across the global Catholic community. As the cardinals entered the Sistine Chapel for the conclave, it was clear that Cardinal Prevost had already made a significant impact. His work was well known, and his vision for the future of the Church resonated with many of his fellow cardinals. Despite his growing influence, however, Robert never imagined that he would be chosen as the next pope. He had spent his life serving others, working humbly in the shadows, and never seeking the spotlight. Yet, as the days of the conclave passed and the cardinals deliberated, it became evident that his leadership style, rooted in humility, compassion, and justice, was exactly what the Church needed at this critical juncture. The election itself was a tense affair, as the cardinals debated the future direction of the Church. Some were focused on the need for a leader who could strengthen the Church's influence in an increasingly secular world, while others emphasized the importance of continuing the work of Pope Francis, particularly in terms of social justice and environmental advocacy. Cardinal Prevost, with his long-standing commitment to both, was seen as a natural choice to bring the Church forward in a way that was faithful to its mission while addressing the pressing issues of the modern world. When the moment arrived and the votes were tallied, the cardinals chose Cardinal Prevost as the 267th Pope of the Catholic Church. The announcement was met with a mixture of surprise, admiration, and, for some, relief. The first American to be elected Pope, Robert Prevost's election was a historic moment that sent ripples across the globe. It was a sign that the Church was ready for a new direction, one that focused not just on preserving tradition but on addressing the very real issues that the world faced. Cardinal Prevost accepted his election with deep humility, and he chose the name Pope Leo XIV, a reference to the great Pope Leo XIII, whose social encyclicals had addressed the plight of workers and promoted social reforms. The choice of the name Leo XIV was significant. It was not just a tribute to Pope Leo XIII, but also a reflection of Robert's own vision for the Church. Pope Leo XIII had been a champion for the poor, a defender of workers' rights, and an advocate for social justice in a time of profound industrial and economic change. Cardinal Prevost's own vision was in many ways an extension of this legacy. He believed that the Church's role in the world was not to maintain the status quo, but to challenge injustice, promote peace, and be a voice for the voiceless. Pope Leo XIV's first appearance on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica was a moment of profound symbolism. As he addressed the thousands of people gathered below, he spoke not of the power of the papacy, but of the power of faith and compassion. He acknowledged the deep divisions in the world, the inequalities, the suffering, the environmental crises, and called on the Church to be a force for healing, unity, and love. His words resonated deeply with the faithful, many of whom had been waiting for a leader who would not only continue the work of Pope Francis, but also push the Church to confront the challenges of the 21st century head-on. His papacy was immediately marked by a strong emphasis on social justice, peace-building, and environmental stewardship. In his inaugural speech, Pope Leo XIV made it clear that the Church would be a force for change, advocating for the poor and marginalized, protecting the environment, and standing against injustice wherever it was found. This commitment to social action, which had defined Cardinal Prevost's career, would be the cornerstone of his papacy. One of Pope Leo XIV's first acts was to convene an international summit on climate change and poverty, bringing together world leaders, scientists, and religious leaders to address the global crises threatening the planet and its most vulnerable populations. This summit was not just a political event. It was a call to action for the Church to play a leading role in advocating for the protection of creation and the well-being of the poor. Pope Leo XIV's insistence on making climate action a priority was a continuation of his long-standing commitment to the environment, which had been one of the central pillars of his work in the Vatican and his leadership in Latin America. But his papacy was not without challenges. The Church, under Pope Leo XIV, was now navigating a rapidly changing world, one where secularism was on the rise, where traditional values were being questioned, and where the Church's role in society was increasingly under scrutiny. Pope Leo XIV understood these challenges, but he was resolute in his belief that the Church's mission was more important than ever. He saw the rise of secularism not as a threat, but as an opportunity for the Church to renew its focus on service, compassion, and social justice. For him, the Church's relevance would be determined not by its political power, but by its ability to serve the needs of humanity, particularly the most marginalized. Throughout his papacy, Pope Leo XIV was a tireless advocate for the poor, the oppressed, and the environment. His leadership style was collaborative, often working with local churches, communities, and international organizations to address global issues. His time in Latin America had taught him the importance of working with people on the ground, listening to their concerns, understanding their struggles, and empowering them to take action. This approach would define his papacy and set a new tone for the Church's relationship with the world. Pope Leo XIV's vision for the Church was one that embraced both tradition and change. He respected the Church's rich history and its teachings, but he also recognized that the world was changing rapidly, and the Church needed to respond to those changes. His leadership was marked by an emphasis on dialogue, inclusivity, and action. He believed that the Church had a moral obligation to not just preach about faith, but to actively work towards a more just and compassionate world. Part 6. A Vision for the Future. Pope Leo XIV's Legacy and Continuing Impact. As Pope Leo XIV settled into his role as the 267th Pontiff of the Catholic Church, it became increasingly clear that his papacy would be defined not only by his deep compassion and unwavering commitment to the poor, but also by his ability to address the most urgent global issues of his time. The world, fraught with conflict, climate change, and inequality, demanded a response from the Church, and Pope Leo XIV was determined to ensure that the Church was a leading voice in efforts to heal the wounds of humanity. His papacy began with an intense focus on the issues that had always been central to his ministry: social justice, human dignity, and environmental stewardship. But it also took on new dimensions, as Pope Leo XIV sought to bridge the gap between traditional Catholic values and the evolving needs of a rapidly changing world. His leadership was deeply informed by the experiences he had in Peru, where he had worked directly with the poorest of the poor. Those years had shaped his view of what it meant to serve, not just spiritually, but practically, through advocacy, community organizing, and tangible action. One of the defining features of Pope Leo XIV's papacy was his emphasis on global solidarity. He recognized that the challenges facing humanity, whether it was poverty, migration, climate change, or war, required a collective response. Pope Leo XIV's calls for unity were not just spiritual appeals, they were calls for action. He sought to unite the global Catholic community around the common goal of promoting peace, justice, and dignity for all people. His vision of solidarity extended beyond the Church. He called upon governments, businesses, and international organizations to work together in addressing these crises. Pope Leo XIV's stance on climate change was perhaps the most bold and controversial aspect of his papacy. He understood that climate change was not just an environmental issue, it was a moral issue. The poor and vulnerable were the ones most affected by environmental degradation, and as a man who had dedicated his life to helping these communities, he saw it as the Church's responsibility to take action. In 2026, just 1 year into his papacy, Pope Leo XIV convened the first-ever global summit on climate change and poverty, bringing together political leaders, environmental activists, and religious figures from all over the world. The summit resulted in the encyclical Laudato Si' II, which called for immediate action on climate change, endorsed the Paris Agreement, and urged global leaders to adopt policies that would protect the planet and its most vulnerable people. His advocacy for refugees and migrants was another cornerstone of his papacy. Drawing from his experiences with displaced communities in Latin America, Pope Leo XIV was unwavering in his belief that the Church's mission was to protect the stranger, just as Christ had done. His leadership on this issue was a defining moment for the Church, as he worked to implement policies that not only supported refugees, but also educated the global public about the shared responsibility to welcome those fleeing war, persecution, and poverty. His bold statements against anti-immigrant rhetoric, particularly in Europe and the United States, were met with both praise and criticism, but Pope Leo XIV remained firm in his stance, believing that the message of love and acceptance must outweigh the politics of fear and division. Pope Leo XIV's commitment to interfaith dialogue was another defining aspect of his papacy. In a world increasingly divided by religion and ideology, Pope Leo XIV worked tirelessly to foster understanding between different faith communities. His outreach to Muslim, Jewish, and Hindu leaders, among others, was unprecedented. He hosted annual interfaith conferences at the Vatican and personally visited leaders of other religions in an effort to build bridges and promote peace. Pope Leo XIV understood that while religious differences existed, the core values of compassion, love, and justice were universal. His papacy became a testament to the power of dialogue and the belief that collaboration across faiths could be a force for good in the world. But Pope Leo XIV was not just a pontiff of words, he was a pontiff of action. Throughout his papacy, he instituted a series of reforms within the Church. His focus was on making the Church more inclusive, accessible, and engaged with modern issues. He championed gender equality within the Church, advocating for greater roles for women in leadership and ministry, and worked to ensure that the voices of young people were heard. He pushed for the Church to modernize its approach to issues like contraception, divorce, and sexual ethics, understanding that these matters required a compassionate, pastoral approach rather than rigid, dogmatic responses. Perhaps one of Pope Leo XIV's most enduring legacies was his ability to inspire the next generation of Catholics. His papacy was marked by a renewed sense of purpose within the Church, especially among young people. Pope Leo XIV's message of justice, peace, and environmental stewardship resonated deeply with the younger generation, who were increasingly looking for ways to engage with the world's problems. His call for a more active church, one that went beyond Sunday Mass and into the streets to address the world's suffering, motivated thousands of young Catholics to take action in their own communities. Pope Leo XIV's influence was also felt outside the Catholic Church. His efforts to promote peace, justice, and interfaith understanding earned him respect from political leaders, human rights activists, and environmentalists. His ability to work with global institutions like the United Nations and international non-governmental organizations, NGOs, helped solidify the Vatican's role as a moral voice in global diplomacy. Pope Leo XIV's leadership bridged the divide between religion and politics, showing that faith-based organizations could be a powerful force for positive change on the world stage. As his papacy progressed, Pope Leo XIV continued to call for deeper reflection within the Church. He was deeply aware of the growing secularization of the world, but rather than view it as a threat, he saw it as an opportunity for the Church to rethink its role. He challenged the Church to move away from self-preservation and instead focus on renewal, a renewal that centered on serving the poor, fighting for justice, and addressing the real issues facing the global community. Pope Leo XIV's final years as pontiff were marked by his health challenges, but his commitment to his mission never wavered. In the end, his papacy was defined by his unwavering belief that the Church's role was to be a force for good, to confront the injustices of the world head-on, and to lead by example. His leadership was a model for the Church, one that combined humility, compassion, and action. Pope Leo XIV passed away in 2040, leaving behind a Church that had been forever changed by his vision and leadership. His legacy endures in the countless lives he touched and the global movement for social justice, peace, and environmental sustainability that he helped inspire. Pope Leo XIV proved that the true power of the Church lay not in its wealth or influence, but in its ability to stand with the marginalized and to call the world to a higher standard of love and justice. Here are 5 possible international media evaluations of Pope Leo XIV, based on his character, leadership, and influence. Vatican News. Pope Leo XIV leadership marks a profound shift within the Church, emphasizing social justice and environmental stewardship. His humility, grounded in years of working with marginalized communities, has set a new standard for papal engagement with global issues. The New York Times. Pope Leo XIV papacy has been defined by his unwavering commitment to the poor and disenfranchised. His strong stance on climate change and human rights has positioned the Catholic Church as a leading voice in addressing the world's most pressing challenges. National Catholic Reporter. Cardinal Prevost's transformation into Pope Leo XIV has brought fresh hope and purpose to the Church. His focus on interfaith dialogue, social justice, and compassion for refugees has inspired millions, making his papacy a beacon of hope for a divided world. BBC News. Pope Leo XIV's efforts to modernize the Church without losing its core values have been groundbreaking. His leadership has not only reinvigorated the Church's mission of service, but also reinforced the importance of ethical responsibility in the face of a rapidly changing world. The Guardian. Pope Leo XIV's papacy represents a much-needed evolution for the Catholic Church, aligning its teachings with the moral imperatives of the 21st century. From combating climate change to championing human rights, his work is reshaping the Church's global role.